Let's dive into this latest milestone in the race for the White House. Voting now underway in the state of New Hampshire for the primary. It's the second contest for Republican presidential candidates and the first for Democrats. A GOP race, suddenly a head-to-head matchup between former President Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. But President Biden isn't even technically on the ballot on the Democratic side. So to help us sort all of this out, we're joined live now by Kean University Provost David Birdsell. Welcome back to the program. We appreciate it as always.
Great to be here this morning.
So let's begin there with President Biden. Why isn't he on the ballot?
Well, there was a big argument in the Democratic Party about who got to go first in the primaries. In 2000, it was South Carolina that put Joe Biden over the top and made him the presumptive nominee. And he wanted to start with a state that reflected that strength. Beyond the Biden candidacy, they wanted a state that was less uniformly white, aged, and relatively conservative, which is New Hampshire. So they've moved South Carolina to the top of the nominating order. And so the New Hampshire primary in the Democratic Party actually doesn't count for the selection of delegates to the convention this year.
I know there's a write-in campaign. Many people are urging people to write in President Biden. We'll see what happens in New Hampshire for President Biden. But let's talk about the makeup of the electorate there in the state of New Hampshire. You mentioned it leans conservative. We know Governor Chris Sununu has been stumping for Nikki Haley. But I believe it's about 39–40% are what they call undeclared. So they can vote either in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary. How could that change
That's exactly right.
And so how could that change what we expect to happen today?
Well, that could change this race in profound ways. You have about 1 million voters in New Hampshire. 300,000 of them, roughly, are Republicans, 300,000 of them registered Democrats. And exactly as you say, those who do not affiliate with either party, who are independents, can choose a ballot from either party. And in this case, a majority of the 400,000 independents have said that they are going to choose Republican ballots. So it could be that a very substantial portion, even a majority of the primary electorate, may not be registered Republicans. And that's really where Nikki Haley is pinning her hopes, because the registered Republicans are solidly in the Trump camp, of course, some not, and she hopes to pick those up. But she wants to make big inroads with that independent block of the vote.
And so let's talk about the timeline, because New Hampshire, in fact, made it a law that it is the first state that has a primary. How important is that timeline as we look at this race?
Well, the timeline, because of laws like New Hampshire's, because of the Republican Party rule that you can't have a primary until you have a caucus. There is actually an exception for New Hampshire, but this creates problems with Michigan and Nevada later in the calendar. The timing matters a lot. I mean, if you think about this, take Donald Trump and Joe Biden off the table. Each state is relatively more inclined toward one party or another, is relatively more liberal, relatively more urban. So making these choices about who goes first and gives a candidate momentum, this is enormously important in the in how people appear to be performing in a primary electorate. Remember, with very small numbers, Donald Trump got 55,000 supporters in Iowa last week. Tiny numbers, but they loom large because that's the contest of the day, and that shapes perceptions going forward.
One more before we leave you for this conversation. So in a potential head-to-head matchup with former President Trump and either President Biden or Nikki Haley, both former President Trump and Nikki Haley are polling ahead of President Biden at this point. So as you look at this, right, that's even with former President Trump facing 4 indictments. We know 90-some criminal counts. What does that say if you're in the White House now running or part of the president's campaign right now for re-election? What does that say about the job he's doing right now and the state of where we are in this race?
Well, it's very clear that right now the indictments appear to be stoking the passions and the enthusiasm of the MAGA base, that portion of the Republican Party that is most committed to Donald Trump. That may change should there be an indictment prior to the general election. I don't think it changes the landscape for the primary, and Trump is in every respect in the strongest position to receive his party's nomination. But in the general election, a much larger percentage of the electorate has indicated that they would be reluctant to vote or would refuse to vote for somebody who has actually been convicted of a crime. So that's the question going forward. Will there be a concluded trial before the election, and will that trial convict the former president of a felony? And if that's the case, that's a game changer because we're not just talking about loyalists within the Republican base at that point.
David Birdsell, always appreciate your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.